I am a huge proponent of low heart rate running and triathlon training. So it might surprise you to hear me say that 80-20 training is just flat out wrong and leading to athletes having poor training and bad performances. Yeah, 80-20 training became a thing from a well-meaning but super popular book that took really good training principles and oversimplified them so severely that athletes all around the world are now obsessed with 80-20 training, which isn't what's been proven to result in the best times on race day. The thing is, I like that the 80-20 training books got people to embrace low heart rate training. I actually recommend that you go purchase those books. However, there are some major things about the 80-20 training methods that aren't giving people the full picture of what they should be doing in their training plans. What's up, motivators? My name is Taryn, and when ordinary people want to accomplish something extraordinary in endurance sports, they choose unlimited motive training plans for as low as $14.99 a month. You're ready for that next big challenge? Let's do it. Let's start by explaining the physiology behind the 80-20 training method. All training zone methods, whether they're the 5-zone or the 7-zone training system, are just different versions of what's actually occurring in our bodies when we exercise, which is 3 different training zones. Zone 1 is the low intensity training zone where we're clearing out lactic acid faster than we're creating it. We can exercise at this intensity all day long. It's the 80 of the 80-20 training method. We're burning a lot of fat at this effort level, we can talk easily, and our heart rates are very low. This is zones 1 and 2 in the 5-zone training models. Zone 2, this is the moderate intensity training zone where we start producing lactic acid faster than we can clear it out. We can still keep exercising, we're just building up a lot of lactic acid in the process. This is a tempo effort or long distance race pace, and this is zone 3 in the bottom of zone 4 in the 5-zone training methods. 80-20 training says that you should spend absolutely no time in this training zone. Zone 3, this is a high intensity training zone where we start building up so much lactic acid that will eventually shut down if we continue at this effort. This is zones 4 and 5 in 5-zone training methods, and it's the 20 of the 80-20 training method. So 80-20 training says that we should spend 80% of our training hours at a low intensity and 20% at absolutely high intensity. No time spent in between. But this is where the problem comes in. First, how do you get to high intensity training zones without spending any time in the moderate intensity zone? It's impossible. Your heart rate needs to gradually climb. Second, should you really spend no time at the moderate intensity training zone, even though that's where we race? Doesn't the physiological training principle of specificity say that to be good at doing a certain thing, we need to do that thing in training? Yeah, it does. And third, 80-20 training came about because a lot of studies found that athletes perform better when 70 to 80% of their total training time was spent at a low intensity. But it wasn't until recently that studies even started looking at what you should do with the other 20% of the time. So strictly prescribing that athletes train at 80% low intensity and the other 20% solely at high intensity isn't specific to our races, it's not backed up by science, and frankly, it's impossible to even do. When we look at professional athletes and the time they spend in each of their training zones, it's not a strict 80-20. It's typically more like a 75-15-10. I've even heard of one world champion who was roughly 80-17-3. Like 80-20 training, most of their training is done at a low intensity, which is the part of the 80-20 training method that I completely agree with, but the rest of the training is very different. You see, 80-20 training is what would be described as polarized, where the training is either done at a low intensity or a high intensity, no in between. But what's been shown to work better and is much more realistic is called pyramidal training, where 75 to 80% of the training is spent at a low intensity, 10 to 15% is at a moderate tempo intensity to build comfort at race pace and allow athletes time to get their heart rate up into the high intensity training zone. Then the final 10 to 15% is at that high intensity training zone. And assuming that 75 to 80% of the training time is spent at that low intensity training zone, this pyramidal method is what has been proven to be more effective. One study of elite runners found that time spent at the moderate intensity tempo effort resulted in better race performances. Another study of age group half Ironman athletes found that the pyramidal method resulted in better run and overall race finish times than the polarized training method. The reason that pyramidal is better than polarized is because athletes need to develop their moderate tempo pace to bridge the gap between low and high intensities. Low intensity teaches us how to go long, high intensity teaches us how to go fast, but moderate intensity teaches us how to go fast for a long period of time, like in a race. So it is critical. A properly designed training plan will have the bulk of the training at low intensity, but during race season there should be a lot of workouts that develop your race intensity. So that might be a bike like this one from our triathlon training plans where athletes are doing intervals at and above race pace so they can start dialing in their race pacing strategy. Or a run like this one from our half marathon training plans where athletes do tempo running intervals to build their speed endurance for their race. It's even critical in swim workouts like this one where Ironman athletes will do long swims at 70 to 80% effort to make sure they can execute that moderate race intensity easily on race day. Now, I like what 80-20 training has done for the community in getting people to embrace low heart rate training as the primary training intensity. But there's a lot more nuance and practicality that needs to go into a training plan that will get athletes to perform their best and be easy for them to execute day in and day out. You're ready to take on that big challenge, so hit the subscribe button and notification bell if you don't want to miss our weekly training videos designed specifically to help ordinary people accomplish something extraordinary in endurance sports. And finally, click the video on the screen. I mentioned a number of times how low heart rate training is the foundation that will set you up for better performances. But it's really hard for people to run at a low heart rate. This video will give you the system to do low heart rate runs correctly without much difficulty. Later, motivators.